I grew up on ranches my whole life. It wasn't anything special to me, just how life was. Cattle, horses, dogs, barbed wire fences, and long stretches of land that you could walk for an hour and not bump into another soul. I knew the sounds of the place. The way the coyotes yipped at night, the way the cattle shifted when a storm was coming, the way the barn creaked in the wind. Nothing about ranch life ever really spooked me. At least, not until the week that I was home alone. My folks had to leave for a few days to visit my aunt who'd gotten sick. My older brother was off working another ranch in the next county, and my sister was staying with friends in town. That left me as the only one home. It wasn't the first time I'd stayed back alone, and I figured it wouldn't be any different than before. My job was simple: feed the animals, keep the water troughs filled, lock everything down at night, make sure that everything survives. The days were fine. Ranch chores will wear you out enough that you don't think about being alone much. But the nights, those were different. The ranch gets quiet in a way that feels heavy. When the sun drops behind the hills, you can see forever, but you can't see what's out there moving in the dark. The dogs bark at shadows you can't make out, and sometimes you catch yourself listening too hard for footsteps that ain't there. I told myself I wasn't going to get spooked. I'd done this plenty before, and nothing had ever happened. But there's something about knowing you're the only person for miles that puts a weight on your chest. Every creak of the porch, every gust of wind rattling on the tin roof, it makes you sit up a little straighter, like you're waiting for something. That first night, I tried to laugh it off. I'd sit at the kitchen table, eat my supper, maybe read a little, and then check the locks and head to bed. Just another night at the ranch. The first couple days went by without much note. Chores, meals, sunup to sundown, but the animals were the first ones to tell me that something wasn't quite right. Our dogs wouldn't settle. Usually they'd make a few rounds at night, bark at a rabbit or a coyote in the distance, then curl up under the porch and sleep. No, not this time though. They paced the yard, tails stiff, hackles raised, ears perked like they were listening for something that I couldn't hear. They growled low and constant, not the usual bark and forget kind of fuss. It was the kind of sound that makes rumbles in their chest when something dangerous is near. The cattle were no better. Normally they'd gather near the troughs at dusk, slow and calm, but I found them huddled tight at the far side of the pasture, all pressed against the fence like they wanted out. Their eyes glowed in the flashlight beams, and I swear they looked jumpy, twitchy, stamping their hooves like they'd bolt if given the chance. The horses tossed their heads in the barn, snorting and stomping. One even kicked the stall boards until I thought that it was going to break the leg. I checked for snakes, cougars, anything that might have spooked them, but I didn't see anything. That night I sat on the porch with the dogs, listening to the coyotes yip and howl somewhere off in the hills, and then suddenly, silence. Coyotes don't just shut up all at once unless something bigger comes around. The quiet that followed was thick. I could hear the wind drag over the grass, the dogs whining under their breath, and my own heartbeat in my ears. Then came the first time I heard the knocking. Slow, heavy thuds against the barn wall. At first I thought maybe a loose board was banging in the wind, but the sound was too steady. Knock, pause, knock, pause. It traveled, like something walking the length of the wall, tapping as it went by. I grabbed the rifle from behind the door, flicked on my flashlight, and walked out there with the dogs at my heels. When I rounded the corner, the knocking stopped. Nothing moved. The beam of the flashlight showed only boards, nails, and dust. I tried to keep calm. Maybe a cougar was prowling around, spooking the animals. Maybe some trespasser had wandered too close and it took off when they saw my light. That was easier to believe than the feeling crawling up my spine. The next morning, I found tracks near the barn. At first, I thought they were boot prints, but the longer I looked, the stranger they seemed. The toes looked long, like a bare human foot, but stretched wrong. Some of them pressed deeper than they should have, as if whoever had made them weighed twice as much as a man. I stared at those prints for a long time, trying to reason it out. Maybe some drifter came through barefoot. Maybe I was seeing things in the dirt that weren't actually there. By sundown, I was telling myself over and over it's nothing. Just animals acting skittish. Just the wind knocking boards. Just my eyes playing tricks in the dirt. But in the back of my mind, I knew better. Something wasn't right, and the animals knew it before I did. On the third night, I decided to do one more check of the property before turning in. It was close to midnight, but the cattle had been bawling off and on all evening, and the dogs refused to calm down. I figured if I made a round with the flashlight and rifle, maybe it would settle my nerves enough to sleep. That night the moon was high, bright enough to cast long shadows across the dirt. I remember the grass rustling in the wind and every sound feeling louder than it should. My nerves were definitely on edge. I walked towards the barn first, the dogs trailing right behind me, their ears still perked. Everything looked the same as earlier. Doors latched, boards intact. I turned to head back when I heard it. My name. It came soft at first, like someone calling from far off. I froze. Out here, miles from the nearest neighbor, nobody should have been calling my name. I strained my ears, thinking maybe I had imagined it. Then it came again, clearer this time. Kevin. I'll never forget the sound of it. It was my brother's voice, the same tone he used when he was teasing me, dragging out my name just enough to annoy me. For a split second, my brain jumped to impossible conclusions. Maybe he'd come home early. Maybe he was hiding out, pulling a prank. But that didn't make sense. He was 3 counties over. He had no reason to be there. The dogs started barking, sharp and furious, facing the fence line at the far edge of the property. They didn't run towards it, though. They just stood their ground, tails down, teeth bared. And that's when I saw it. Something that looked very much like a figure, standing out past the barbed wire. At first glance, it looked like a man. Tall shoulders hunched, arms hanging stiff. My flashlight beam didn't quite reach that far, so I squinted, trying to make out the details. The figure shifted, and its movements made my stomach drop. They were too jerky, like it didn't know how to bend its knees right. Kevin. It called again. Same voice as before. My brother. Same dragged out tone. But what I was looking at definitely wasn't Ethan. My mouth went dry. I raised the flashlight higher. For a second, I caught a glimpse. Pale skin, eyes glowing like an animal caught in headlights. Then, before my brain could even register the details, the figure dropped. Not to its knees, not to crouch, but flat to all fours in one fluid motion. And it moved. Now I've seen cougars run. I've seen coyotes dart, even wild dogs tear across the pasture, but nothing moved like the thing that I saw that night. It was too fast, too low, too smooth, like it didn't have bones in its joints or something. It skittered along the ground, covering 10 yards in the blink of the eye before vanishing into the brush. The dogs went crazy but didn't chase. They barked and howled but kept themselves planted at my side, whining and snapping at the empty dark. I don't know if they were too scared to give chase or they wanted to stay by me to protect me, but either way, they weren't moving any closer to that thing. And that told me more than anything else could. If even they wouldn't follow it, I had no business standing out there another second. I backed towards the house, rifle trembling in my hands, and locked every bolt and latch I could find, but even then, with every curtain drawn, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, and that something was watching me. By the 4th night, I knew something was out there. I wasn't sure what, but I knew it wasn't anything natural. That evening, I double-checked the locks on every door and window. I made sure the rifle was loaded and leaned against the kitchen wall. The dogs, who normally begged to come in on cool nights, wouldn't even leave the porch and ended up hiding underneath the house. One whimpered so long and so low I had to clap my hands to get him to quiet down, even though that didn't do a damn thing. Around midnight, the scratching started. At first it was faint, like tree branches dragging across glass, but there are no trees close enough to the house to do that. The sound came from the front window, slow and steady, the unmistakable scrape of nails on glass. I froze in my tracks in the kitchen. The scratch traveled across the window and then stopped. A moment later, heavy footsteps thudded across the porch. Each one landed with a weight that made the boards creak. I stood, rifle in my hand, following the noise. The steps circled, moving across the porch to the side of the house, then back towards the back door. I waited, straining my ears, and then it came. Kevin. But this time it wasn't my brother's voice. It was my mother's. Soft, almost pleading, the way she called when supper was ready. My throat tightened. She was 3 states away, sitting in a hospital with my aunt. There was no way it was her. I'd just talked to her, not that long ago. The voice shifted again, low and gruff. Now it was my dad's voice, calling my name like he was angry. And then again it changed once more, turning shrill, the pitch too high, like my sister when she was little and didn't get her own way. The voices came from every side of the house. Sometimes a whisper, sometimes a shout, sometimes 2 at once like they were arguing over who got to speak. I pressed the rifle to my shoulder, though I had no target, no idea where to point it. I made the mistake of peeking through the window. For less than a second, I saw it. Something that looked like a pale face against the glass. But the features were stretched wrong. What I saw had eyes that were too far apart, a mouth too wide, and a grin curved up past where ears should have been. I think I saw a long arm slide up, a hand dragging claws across the pane with a screech, and then whatever that thing was ducked away, moving faster than I could even process and vanishing into the dark. I stumbled back, yelling in fright, the rifle clutched tight. My gut told me plain, this wasn't something bullets could fix. A cougar, a wolf, even a trespasser, I could handle those, but this wasn't something natural. The rest of the night stretched on like a bad dream. I sat in the center of the kitchen, rifle across my lap, listening to footsteps circle the house again and again. Sometimes they were light, like a child running, sometimes heavy like a man stomping. The voices faded after a while, but then came back, and the scratching came with it. It came in bursts, at the front door, the windows, even the roof. At one point I heard the boards above me groan like something was crawling across the shingles. The dogs never came out from their hiding spot under the porch. They barked a few times, but mostly stayed silent except for the one that whined the entire night. That sound cut worse than the footsteps, because if the dogs were that scared, I knew I was in real trouble. When morning finally came, I forced myself outside, even though every step felt like I was walking into a trap. The sun looked like salvation, but I knew better. The animals hadn't calmed down. The horses still thrashed in their stalls, the cattle hadn't moved from their corner. And then I saw it. By the barn, half buried in the dust, lay one of our chickens. Or what was left of it. Its neck was broken, body torn open, feathers scattered like snow. The way it was laid out, straight and with a purpose, felt like a message. Not something a predator normally leaves behind. Not a kill for food. A warning. The tracks around the barn were the same as before, half human, half wrong. The ground looked torn up from something big moving in circles. That was the moment I stopped lying to myself. Whatever was out here wasn't just passing through. It knew I was alone, and it wasn't finished with me yet. And it liked the fear that it was causing. By the fifth night, I was running on fumes. I know I should have left, but some part of me needed to defend our home. I'd barely slept, just dozing off with the rifle across my lap, jerking awake at every sound. My eyes burned, my hands shook, my nerves were stretched so thin I thought I might break before the creature even showed up again. That evening, things stayed quiet, almost too quiet, like the calm before a storm. Then the lights started to flicker. At first, I thought it was just a bad bulb or a generator acting up, but it wasn't. Every lamp in the house dimmed and flared at the same time. My stomach was in knots. I sat in the kitchen again, rifle at my side, praying the power wouldn't go out completely. The first bang rattled the walls so hard I thought the house might split. Pictures vibrated on the walls. It came from the back, a heavy thud like someone had slammed both fists against the siding. Before I could move, another hit the front porch, then the side, then the roof. The whole house groaned and shook under the assault like whatever was out there wanted to rip its way inside. The dogs didn't bark. I could hear them whining under the porch. I could hear claws scraping the dirt, trying to get themselves to dig deeper into their hiding spots. I clutched the rifle tight, sweat dripping down my forehead, whispering half-remembered prayers under my breath. I wasn't much of a churchgoer, but I begged for help, begged for it to leave me alone. I promised I'd never doubt again. I'd do whatever it took. Just please, please let me see the sunrise. The roof creaked above me. Slow steps dragged across the shingles, boards bending under the weight. And then came the laughter, worst of anything so far. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to freeze my blood. A low, rasping chuckle, crawling down the walls and into my bones. I gritted my teeth, raised the rifle, and turned towards the window when I felt the weight of its eyes on me. And there it was. For the first time I saw it clear, standing just beyond the glass, inches away, face lit by the flickering lamp. Its body looked human in shape, but stretched wrong. Limbs too long, shoulders hunched like a starving wolf. No clothes. The skin was pale and patchy, stretched tight over bones. Its eyes glowed, not like an animal's caught in headlights, but with their own sick light. They were yellow and burning and locked on me. And its mouth was all teeth and grin, stretched too wide, like it was split from ear to ear. I didn't think. I raised the rifle, aimed at the twisted grin, and pulled the trigger. The shot blew the lamp out and deafened me in the tight space. When the smoke cleared, the window was empty. For a long, breathless second, I thought maybe I'd killed it. Maybe it was gone. Then the scream came. High-pitched, unearthly, echoing through the night like metal tearing against metal. It rose and fell. The dogs howled under the porch. And then silence. The rest of the night dragged on like it was some kind of punishment. Every creak of the house had me raising the rifle again, but nothing else came. No more banging, no more scratching, no more voices. I didn't sleep. I sat there in the dark, waiting for dawn, praying that that scream would not come again. And it didn't. And then nothing happened for a few days. When my parents finally came home a couple days later, I didn't say much about it. I told them the animals had been restless, that I hadn't slept well, that I'd fired a shot at something prowling near the window. I left out the details, the voices, the face, the scream. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy, and truth be told, I didn't want to speak the memory out loud. But one of my neighbors knew something. When I stopped by the feed store a week later, I mentioned offhand that the dogs had been spooked all night and the cattle had been bunched against the fence. The old man behind the counter gave me a long look, slow and heavy, and then just nodded and said, "Some things out here don't like to be talked about." And then he changed the subject. Little by little, the animals calmed down. The horses stopped thrashing in their stalls, the dogs stretched out in the sun again, and the cattle returned to grazing near the troughs. But me, I never shook it. Every night after, even when the ranch was full of people again, I'd hear the creak of the roof or the scrape of the branches and feel my chest tighten, waiting for that voice to call my name again. Years have gone by, and I still see that pale grin when I close my eyes. I still hear that scream, sharp and inhuman. I hear it rattling inside my skull. Folks can tell me that it was a cougar, a trespasser, but I know better. I know what I saw on the other side of the glass. I'll say this much. You don't have to believe me. You can laugh, or roll your eyes, whatever. That's fine. But just pray you never hear your own name whispered back to you when you know that you're alone. I should have known better. That's the part that still eats me. That quiet little voice in the back of my head telling me not to go. You see, my abuela used to warn us about brujas and bad places. But brujas were one thing. What we walked into that weekend was something much older and much, much worse. It was me, Marcus, and Danny. We'd been friends since middle school. Inseparable, even as we got older and scattered into jobs and girlfriends. This trip was supposed to be one last throwback. One last stupid camping trip. Danny had picked the area. A dried riverbed, like it was some hidden treasure. It lay just off the edge of a reservation boundary. Technically, not ours to be stomping around on. Rumor said people disappeared there sometimes. Marcus muttered about respecting lines, but Danny teased him, and Marcus folded the way he always did. I didn't argue. I told myself it was just a story. When we got there, the riverbed looked like a scar carved into the earth. There was pale stone and dried mud baking under the last heat of the day. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. It was too quiet. Too quiet for a forest like that. No insects, no birds, just our crunching boots and Danny's voice echoing off the rocks. There was no cell service either, but hey, that was part of the adventure, right? We were camping off the grid. We pitched the tent at the edge of the bed, where the earth sloped into the scrub brush. I tried to laugh along, but the silence from the trees made every chuckle feel hollow. When the fire finally sparked to life, I did feel a flicker of relief. We cooked food on skewers, trading stories. Marcus worried about coyotes. Danny insisted the real danger was my snoring. I sat between them, trying to believe that this was just another night with old friends. But deep down, I think even then, I knew better. We all should have. The first evening settled around us with a weird weight. Normally, with the woods, you get the soundtrack of all the night creatures. But it was spooky quiet. Even Danny, the loudmouth, glanced around the trees more than once. At one point, Marcus went to get more wood, and I busied myself poking the fire, trying not to focus on how still everything felt. But only a couple of minutes later, Marcus came back faster than I expected, dropping an armload of sticks hard into the dirt. There's something out there. I saw something moving on 2 legs. I felt my stomach clench, but Danny just laughed and cracked open a beer. Dude, it was probably a deer, and it was probably on 4 legs. Or maybe it was your own shadow. Just chill out, have a good time. I told myself that Marcus was just spooked, maybe nerves getting the better of him, but still I found myself scanning the dark edges beyond the fire every few seconds. Later, when the fire burned low, the rustling started. It was soft at first, like leaves dragging against each other. Then a deliberate crunch. Footsteps? My chest went cold. Danny tried to brush it off as little animals, but even he didn't sound like he believed it. So we sat there in silence, just listening. Nothing came into view. After a while, Marcus said he was going to bed. He crawled into the tent, and I followed. Danny lingered, had another beer, then zipped himself in after us. For whatever reason, sleep didn't come easy that night. Every snap of a twig outside made me flinch. My dreams were shallow, filled with half-heard whispers that evaporated when I jerked awake. When morning finally broke, I rolled over to see Marcus's sleeping bag empty. His boots were gone too. At first, I thought he was doing his business. Then 10 minutes passed. Then 20. By an hour, dread settled in. Danny tried to laugh it off, saying he thinks he's pranking us, but neither of us laughed. We waited. We called for him. Nothing. That was when we knew something was wrong. We called his name until our throats were raw. Danny cupped his hands around his mouth and hollered loud enough to shake birds from the trees. Only there weren't any birds. That silence from the night before lingered like a curse. By late morning, we started searching in widening circles. The dried riverbed twisted and dipped in strange ways. There were gullies and dead ends everywhere. We split up, but never too far. Neither of us wanted to be alone. Danny stomped through the brush on one side of the bend, waving his arms like Marcus could see from miles away. "If this is some prank, it's not funny anymore," he started yelling. But still there was no answer. Just the wind dragging across the dry branches. We didn't find anything. No footprints except our own. No gear. No sign he'd wandered off to fish or explore. It was like he'd been plucked out of the tent and erased. By midday, the two of us were sitting on the river's bed, worried sick. We couldn't think of anything else to do. We weren't going to leave and call for help. We weren't leaving him out there. We argued about whether to hike out for help, but neither of us wanted to risk Marcus returning to find us gone. The thought of him stumbling back to camp, confused, scared, alone, it kept us there. We told ourselves we'd wait until nightfall. If he didn't come back, we'd leave at dawn for the car. The hours dragged. Every time I thought I heard movement, my chest leapt, but it was always nothing. By the time the sun dipped again, both of us were ragged and exhausted. We built the fire higher this time, stacked wood close, sat shoulder to shoulder. Neither of us wanted to admit it, but it was clear. Marcus wasn't just lost. Something had happened. We were building the wood like a barricade. Neither of us said it out loud, but we were both scared stiff of the dark at that point. We were also hoping that if Marcus had seen the fire and was just really lost, it could be a beacon for him to come back. The night started creeping in slow. It was getting colder. The stars up top were sharp. At first it was the same eerie silence as the night before, but then the rustling started. I remember Danny calling out for Marcus, sitting bolt upright, hoping that it was him. The brush shifted and branches started snapping. And then a voice, Marcus's voice, drifted out of the darkness. "Guys? Hey, guys?" But something was wrong. The tone was flat, too even, like someone doing a perfect impression without the little quirks that made Marcus sound like himself. Danny laughed nervously. He yelled, "Dude, quit screwing with us. You had us scared all day." We waited for him to step into the firelight, only he didn't. And the voice called again, this time from the opposite end of the clearing. "Guys, over here." I remember how quickly the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I knew for a fact that wasn't Marcus. It was what my abuela always talked about. And I sure wasn't going out there. We scrambled into the tent, yanking the zipper closed like it could save us, but then things just got worse from there. From the trees came another voice, but it wasn't Marcus's this time. It was my own. "Danny, open the tent. It's fine." Danny's face went pale in the glow of the lantern, and he grabbed the one pistol that we had brought with us. Like it would do any good with that thing out there. I remember looking at him. He looked like he was already starting to cry. That's your voice, man." How is that possible? But before I could answer, there was another call. My voice again, only louder and harsher from the other side of the tent. Danny shook his head violently. Nope, forget that. That's when the footsteps started. They were crunching all around us, slowly and deliberately. Heavy breathing brushed against the nylon walls, and something was dragging a hand or claw along the fabric, making it shiver inwards. Then came Marcus's name, whispered inches from where I sat frozen. Marcus. Drawn out, wrong, inhuman. Danny clapped a hand over his mouth, his eyes wide. I pressed my palms to my knees, trying not to shake apart. For hours, that thing circled us. Sometimes it laughed, low and broken. Sometimes it went dead silent, only to thump against the tent hard enough to rattle the poles. We clung to each other, whispering prayers, trying to convince ourselves that it would stop if we just waited it out. It went on almost all night long. When it finally started to lighten outside the tent, that thing left with the night. When it was bright outside, and I mean fully bright, Danny unzipped the flap. Everything outside was wrong. Our packs had been dragged 10 feet from where we left them. Firewood was stacked neatly in weird piles. Definitely not where we had left it. Everything was moved around but undamaged, like whatever it was had rearranged the entire campsite. There was still no sign of Marcus either. And in that moment I realized with a sinking stomach that whatever had spent the night with us hadn't just been passing by. It was playing with us. Danny stood there with his hands on his hips. What the hell do we do, man? I told him the only thing I could think of. Let's fan out, check the gullies again, try to find Marcus and get the hell out of here. Maybe he slipped and hurt himself. Danny agreed quickly. Maybe too quickly. As if movement would keep his fear at bay. He grabbed the pistol just in case. We combed the riverbed first. We called Marcus's name again and again until it sounded hollow in my throat. Not even the birds answered. No squirrels darted between the trees. The woods felt scrubbed of life like we were in some kind of dead zone. About an hour in, though, Danny shouted that he found tracks. I hurried over and looked in the soft dirt along the edge of the riverbed. There were bare footprints. They couldn't have been Marcus's, though. The toes were stretched too long. The arch was twisted wrong, like the impression of a human caught halfway into becoming something else. Those aren't his, I said before I could stop myself. I looked at Danny. All he did was nod in agreement. But we followed them anyways. The prints vanished into stone, though, like whatever had left them just stepped out of existence. After that, we searched for hours on end. We went up ridgelines, through the gullies again, across dry scrub, walked through the trees. Nothing. No torn fabric, no shoe prints, no broken branches. Just that unshakable sense that something was watching us from the trees, staying just far enough away to never be seen. By mid-afternoon, we'd given up. Danny said we needed help. We couldn't just keep wandering in circles. I didn't like the plan. I didn't want to leave him out there alone. I mean, we didn't even know if he was hurt. We didn't know if he was going to come back and find us gone. Danny was angry. He yelled at me, asking, "And what if we stay and whatever that thing was last night comes back, huh? You want to end up missing too? Someone has to hike out, find a ranger, find anybody, and come back with more people to search for our friend." Those words hit me hard because they made sense. Still, something recoiled in me, though, at the thought of leaving my friend there. I wasn't abandoning him. I couldn't. Danny leaned back. "Then you stay. I'll go. You can keep the gun." The silence after that was brutal. The idea of splitting up felt worse than staying put. If whatever circled our tent that night wanted us alone, it'd get it easy now. Finally, I shook my head. No, we stick together. Just one more night. If he doesn't come back by morning, we both go. Danny just nodded. I could tell he was mad, but he also agreed with me. So we just trudged back to camp in silence. I tried to convince myself that Marcus would just walk out of the trees any minute, but in the pit of my stomach I knew the truth. Night was coming, and so was it. The moment the sun began sinking behind the ridges, Danny and I pulled every scrap of gear inside the tent. We stacked packs against the walls, dragged stone to the entrance flap, Anything that gave the illusion of a barrier between us and the night. It was a stupid kind of hope, but it was all we had. I didn't say what we were both thinking. It already had Marcus. If it wanted us, nylon walls and backpacks weren't going to stop it. But still, the ritual of barricading gave us something to cling to. And then, as the sun went down, it began to happen again. The first sound was a scrape, something dragging slow and deliberate across the nylon wall. Something that got to the tent without making one single bit of sound. I froze, staring at the bulge in the fabric as this thing traced its way from corner to corner like it was enjoying itself. Then came a second scrape. Lower this time. Long nails or claws, testing the material. A handprint pressed against the fabric inches from my body. I could see 5 long fingers, flattening the nylon. I could see the outline of the joints bending wrong. And then the voices started again. "Danny, it's me. Let me in." It was Marcus's voice, but it was as smooth as a recording. Danny's eyes filled with tears. He was desperate to answer our friend, but I whispered to him not to. Then came another voice. My voice. "Danny, open up. We're fine out here." I shook my head so hard my teeth rattled. "That's not me. That's not me." Voices multiplied. Marcus again, pleading. Then Danny's own voice, distorted and warbling, like someone had learned the sound of him but not the soul. And then, cutting through all of them, a woman's voice. Words I couldn't make out, whispered so close to the nylon it might have been inside with us. And that's when the laughter began. It started high and sharp, like a child's giggle, then warped into something raspy. The sound circled the tent, overlapping itself as though there were 10 throats laughing. Then it came with a smell that turned my stomach. Rotting meat mixed with sour milk, with something metallic underneath, like pennies dissolved in vinegar. The stench flooded through the tent seams. I gagged, pressing my shirt to my nose. Danny swore and fumbled for the zipper, but I yanked his wrist. "Don't open it," I hissed. The laughter cut off in an instant. Silence followed. Then, far away, a scream ripped through the trees. Whatever had been out there, it moved faster than anything possible. It was just at the tent, and then it was off in the trees. We're talking less than a second. It wasn't human. Whatever that thing was started like a wolf's howl, then broke into these short shrieks and roars. It rose and fell. It echoed across the canyon. Danny sobbed. He had the gun, but we both knew that it was going to be useless. And then came Marcus's voice again. This time it was perfect. "It's me. I'm hurt. Please, please let me in." Danny lunged for the zipper. I tackled him, both of us crashing against the packs. "It's not him." He fought me, tears streaking down his face, saying it sounds like him. "That's the point," I told him. "It's trying to trick us." Before we could argue more, the entire tent bucked. Something had slammed into it hard enough to topple us sideways. "Come out." The tone was inhuman, like gravel grinding against metal, but the meaning was clear. This thing was getting frustrated that it couldn't get to us in the tent. The smell hit harder. It was overwhelming. Wet dog, sewage, rotting eggs, something sulfuric that burned my sinuses. My stomach clenched, and I did everything I could to keep the vomit down. Danny retched into his sleeve. The tent shook again, harder, until I thought the stakes would rip from the ground. We clung to each other, praying the canvas wouldn't just split. All night this kept going on. Scraping, whispering, growling, voices layered one on top of the other until I couldn't tell which one was real and which one wasn't. Marcus begging, my own voice mocking, Danny yelling at us, the woman's voice chanting words that I didn't understand in some language that I can't even speak. Every so often, that awful scream split the distance, and it was answered by a laugh so cold it turned my skin to ice. This was the worst night that I've ever experienced in my life. The feeling of fear was the only thing that I could focus on. This was terrifying. We whispered prayers, took turns holding the gun to try to make us feel better, but neither of us dared to fire. If we shot, we'd shred our only shelter. If we stepped outside, we knew that we wouldn't come back. Danny kept mumbling over and over, "It can't come in, it can't come in, it can't come in." Like if he said it enough, it'd be true. But I think part of it really was true. Because that thing out there could have shred the tent in an instant and came in and grabbed us, but it didn't. The hours stretched for eternity. My body ached from staying curled and rigid. And then, like some miracle, light. The tent started glowing orange at first. Birds chirped faintly in the distance. The first sound of life in days. Morning was coming, and we were alive. We'd made it through another night with that thing out there. But as I unzipped the flap, I knew we hadn't survived because it let us. We survived because it wasn't finished yet. The sun had just climbed over the ridge when we saw him. Danny was crouched over the fire pit, trying to coax the flames out of the wood. He saw him first, and jumped up pointing. I spun around, half convinced it was another trick, but it wasn't. It was Marcus. The real Marcus. He staggered into the clearing like a drunk. His clothes were wrinkled and streaked with dirt. His eyes were glassy like he hadn't slept for years. For one heartbeat, I thought he was a corpse walking towards us, until he croaked, "Hey guys." Danny ran first, nearly tripping over himself. I followed, slower, torn between relief and dread. "Where in the hell have you been?" Danny shouted. "Do you know what we've been through?" Marcus blinked at him. "I just went to the bathroom. Why are you freaking out?" The words hit me like ice water. I stared at him. "Marcus, it's been 2 days." I remember this perplexed look on his face. "What? No. We were just here yesterday, right? It's morning. We're gonna hike today." Danny barked a laugh that was half of a sob. "No, man. You disappeared. We searched everywhere. You've been gone for days." We pressed him, begged him for anything. Where he went, what he saw, if he remembered voices in the night. Nothing. His memory was a clean slate. His skin was fine. Not a bruise or scratch, just grime from the brush. It was too much. We couldn't stay there another second. Danny and I tore down the camp like men possessed. We didn't bother folding anything. Poles snapped, nylon stuffed, half zipped into packs, cans and wrappers shoved into bags. Marcus just stood there, dazed, swaying like he might topple over. When the car finally roared to life after we hiked out, relief hit me so hard that I cried. On the way out, though, was when we saw it. As we drove away from that hellhole. A coyote on a ridge above the road. Only, this wasn't any coyote I'd ever seen. It was huge, taller than a wolf, bigger than a wolf, shoulders wide with muscle, its coat mangy in places. It didn't flinch at the car, didn't dart away like normal, just stood there, head cocked, mouth open, and something too wide to be a snarl. It was almost like a smile. Danny cursed under his breath and gripped the wheel tighter. Marcus stared out the window blankly like he didn't see it at all. I couldn't look away. My stomach turned. I knew that wasn't just a coyote. Not really. It was watching us go, calm as you please, like it had all the time in the world. Back home, everything felt unreal, like we'd woke up inside someone else's life. We didn't talk much on the drive home. What was there to say? The only priority was getting Marcus checked out. His parents met us at the house. They dragged him to the ER that same night while Danny and I sat in the waiting room, still dirty from the trip, not even eating or showering. The doctors ran everything that they could think of. Blood work, CT scan, nothing. No trauma, no bruising, no drugs in his system, not even any signs of alcohol. His vitals were textbook normal. To them, it was a simple case, a blackout episode, maybe dehydration. His parents clung to those explanations like lifelines. They didn't want to hear about voices in the dark or claw marks across the tent wall. They didn't know that their son had vanished from the face of the earth for 48 hours and then returned without so much as a scratch. Marcus himself didn't even seem bothered. He shrugged, kept saying, "I don't remember," like it was nothing at all. He slid back into his routine within a week. He never asked us for details, never wanted to know. But I remembered. So did Danny. We couldn't just slip back into the real world like nothing had happened. Even now, years later, we still talk about it on some nights, and you can see the fear creep into Danny's face again. It's the same fear that I still feel. I moved 4 states away, put as much distance between myself and that riverbed as I could, but the distance didn't matter. That night still follows me. I don't camp anymore. I haven't since that trip, and I never will again. I don't even like walking past tents at the outdoor stores. The sight of nylon walls makes my skin crawl. Some nights I'll be lying in bed and hear rustling outside my window, and it drags me straight back to that night. And coyotes are even worse. Every time I hear one, my chest locks up. I can't shake the memory of that huge one on the ridge staring at me like it knew me, like it was still playing the same game. People tell me time heals, but it doesn't erase. It sharpens. The years between then and now only make the memory clearer for me. Like whatever I saw wants me to hold on to it, to carry it, to fear it. I've never gone back. Never even driven through that county. If I'm being honest, I don't think I'd ever survive setting foot anywhere near that place again. Because here's the truth. I don't believe that it's over. I believe it let us go. I believe one night, when the world is quiet and I've almost convinced myself I'm safe, I'll hear my name whispered back to me in the dark. I was 19 that summer, working a fencing job out near the edge of a reservation land. It wasn't glamorous work, sweating all day in the sun, pounding posts into dry dirt, rolling out barbed wire until my hands blistered. But it paid better than flipping burgers in town. 3 of my buddies from school signed on too, so we figured we'd make it through it together. Instead of renting separate rooms in town, we pooled our money and grabbed a beat-up trailer just outside the fence line. It was cheap. Dirt cheap. And that should have been our first clue. The place was old, paint peeling, floors creaking, the air smelled like dust and old cigarettes, but we told ourselves it would do. Just a place to crash between shifts. From the first day, folks in town gave us looks when we mentioned where we were staying. Nothing outright, just side glances, quick frowns, stuff like that. One old man at the hardware store said flat out, "Don't stay out after dark. Not around there." He wouldn't explain, just shook his head and walked off like we should already know what he was talking about. Another woman at the gas station told us we ought to find someplace else. Cheap ain't always worth it, she said. We laughed it off. She crossed herself and muttered something I couldn't catch. We didn't take it seriously. We were young, broke, and cocky. Ghost stories were for kids and campfires, not for 4 guys trying to make rent. I remember saying out loud the first night, sitting on a sagging couch with a cold beer in my hand, "I don't believe in ghost stories. We'll be fine." And at the time, I meant it. The trailer itself was a wreck, no 2 ways about it. The walls were so thin you could hear every gust of wind rattle through the place, and the front door never shut all the way unless you leaned your weight into it. The floor sagged in spots, the bathroom door stuck half the time, and everything smelled faintly of mildew and cigarette smoke no matter how many candles we lit. But we were 19 and broke, and as long as it had running water and a fridge to keep the beer cold, we didn't care. We would sit around a small table with leftover pizza and cheap beer, listening to coyotes yipping out in the distance, the same way they did back home. The trailer creaked as it cooled, the wind pushed against the thin sliding, all of it felt normal. We started trading stories, the way you do when you've got nothing else to do. One of the guys brought up the warnings we heard in town, the old man at the warehouse store. "Don't go out after dark," he said in a mock dramatic voice, and everyone laughed. Pretty soon we were piling on. We told every ghost story we could remember. Bloody Mary, hook-handed killers, old legends we'd half heard from grandparents. We laughed and jeered and dared each other to go outside after dark alone. Nobody did, of course, but we kept it up until our voices were hoarse. Looking back, though, I sometimes wonder if that's when it marked us. We weren't just ignoring the warnings. We were mocking them. We were laughing at something people were treating with respect. Maybe it didn't like that. Maybe that's why it came for us. Back home, the nights always had sound. Crickets chirping, frogs by the creek, cicadas buzzing so loud it felt like the air itself was vibrating. Even out in the desert, you usually heard insects or the flutter of bats or something. You know, the constant hum of life after dark. But here, once the sun dipped behind the hills, everything seemed to go silent. The coyotes would howl for just a while, then fall silent. No crickets or owls or even the buzz of mosquitoes by your ear. Just heavy and absolute silence. I told myself it was just the way things were out there. Maybe things like bugs didn't thrive in this part of the country. But deep down I think I knew better. Land isn't supposed to go that quiet unless something's wrong. It was 5 nights in that everything started to feel off. We'd all turned in late, bellies full of gas station burritos and too much soda. Sometime in the night, I woke up to a sound at the front door. At first, I thought it was just the wind, maybe the screen door bumping loose in the breeze, but then I heard it again. Slow, dragging scratches against the metal. Not quick scrapes, not the tapping of a branch, but steady lines, like someone dragging their nails down a chalkboard. I sat up in bed, straining to listen. The sound went on for a while, then stopped, then started again. I thought about waking the others, but I told myself it had to just be an animal. Maybe a raccoon or a coyote sniffing around for scraps. Still, I couldn't bring myself to check. So I just sat there in the dark, staring at the curtains, waiting for it to stop. And eventually it did. And then I must have fallen back asleep because the next thing I knew, sunlight was pouring through the windows. When I stepped out that morning, the first thing I saw were the marks. The trailer door was gouged, with these long, deep scratches running straight down the metal like someone had dragged a set of claws across it. There were 5 distinct lines, each one a couple of feet long, cutting right through the paint into the steel beneath. I ran my fingers over them and felt the grooves. They were deep. Eventually, all of us stood around staring at that damn door. One buddy suggested it was teenagers from town messing with us. Another said maybe it was a coyote jumping up, clawing and catching the door. Nobody sounded convinced, not even when they tried to convince themselves. But everybody laughed it off anyway, clapping each other on the back and calling it a good prank. I tried to laugh too, but my stomach was in knots already. I guess I was more superstitious than the rest of them. And that's when I noticed the tracks. The dirt around the trailer was dry and hard, but there were these prints leading away from the door clear as day. Barefoot, but too big to be normal. The toes were long, like they were stretched out, and sank deep. I crouched down, staring at them until the hairs on my arms stood up. One of my friends asked what I was looking at, and I told him, tracks. Everyone leaned over, squinting, and then started laughing again. They said, man, you're just seeing things, or could be boot prints worn down, or even one of us walked around barefoot last night. None of us wear a size 15 clown shoe, though. All day, I couldn't stop thinking about those scratches in the tracks. Every time I passed by the door, my eyes went straight to those grooves carved deep in there like a warning. That night, I told myself I was going to sleep straight through. I pulled the blanket up, shut my eyes, and tried to ignore every creak and groan of the trailer. But then I heard them. Whispers. Faint at first, like the rustle of grass or weeds. Then clearer, threading through the walls of the trailer, too soft to make out words, but too sharp to just be the wind. I held my breath and listened. The voices rose and fell, sometimes sounding like a man, sometimes a woman, sometimes a child. I couldn't place the language either. Couldn't even swear it was a real language. Just voices in the weeds whispering and shifting, circling the trailer. I sat frozen in bed, ears straining, praying someone else would hear it. And then finally one of my friends stirred in the next room. "Shut up out there," he yelled, like it was some punk kid playing games. But it was no kid playing games out there. The whisper stopped. I don't know how long I laid there staring at the ceiling, too afraid to look out the window, but by morning I was sure of one thing. Whatever had left those scratches, whatever had made those prints, was the same thing that was out there last night whispering around the trailer. A week slipped by, and then by then we were half joking about the weird nights, trying to forget them. None of us brought up the scratches on the door anymore, though we all saw them every time we walked in. One night near the end of that week, though, the knocking started again. It was past midnight, the 4 of us sitting around a little table playing cards. We'd worked a long day and were just trying to relax, but the air in the trailer was heavy, like a storm was coming, even though the sky outside was completely clear. And then, knock. A single solid thud against the wall. We froze, cards in our hands, eyes shifting to each other. Another knock followed, this time further down the trailer. Then another, circling slow, like someone walking the perimeter, rapping their knuckles against the thin metal as they went. One of my friends tried to laugh, saying it was the kids again and we should go out there and beat them up, but his voice cracked. The knocking stopped. For a moment, all I could hear was the hum of the light above us and the blood rushing in my ears. Then the voices came. At first, it was just my name, soft, drawn out, floating through the trailer walls. I stiffened. Nobody in town knew me well enough to come all the way out here, and my family sure wasn't anywhere near. I hadn't even told them exactly where we were staying. And then another voice joined in. This time, one of my friend's names, called in the tone of his mother. His head shot up, eyes wide. "That's my mom," he whispered. Like saying it out loud would make sense or something. He half stood, moving toward the door. Me and one of my friends grabbed him. "Don't," I hissed. "She's not here. She can't be here." But he yanked against me and said that's her. I swear it is. Before we could argue, though, another voice cut through. This one sounding like someone's girlfriend, playful and teasing. Then another, like a brother's deep laugh. One after another, voices we knew, people close to us, circling the trailer, calling our names, trying to coax us outside. My chest tightened. They hadn't visited. Nobody had. So how in the hell did it know what their voices sounded like? We pressed ourselves against the wall, straining to listen. I'm sure all of their hearts were hammering just as hard as mine. One of the guys whispered, "They're just messing with us, right?" But his voice held no conviction. Then the floodlight outside clicked on with a hum. The glow spilled across the dirt yard, and there it was, crouched just beyond the reach of the light. Pale, human-shaped but twisted. Its limbs bent wrong, its spine arched like it was ready to spring, eyes reflecting the light in a way that humans don't, glowing greenish, and they were locked on us through the window. We all saw it. No one can deny that we saw it. For a moment, it didn't move. Just crouched there, head cocked, mouth stretched into something like a grin. We all swore inside the trailer. Then in a blur, it dropped to all fours and moved out of the glow of the light. All four of us bolted back from the window, cussing, nearly tripping over each other in the cramped space. We slammed the flimsy door shut, locked it, pushed the table up against it. We were in a panic, trying to figure out what it was and what we were supposed to do. The knocking didn't return that night. Neither did the voices, but you can be damn sure that none of us slept a second that night. All we did was sit in silence, guns across our laps, every ear tuned into the outside, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. But we all knew. It wasn't gone. It was just playing with us, and maybe for that night, it was done. The week that followed was the longest of my life. None of us seemed to want to say it out loud, but the air inside the trailer had changed. We still played cards and made dumb jokes during the day. Still hauled fencing and worked ourselves raw in the sun, but come nightfall, all of that died. As soon as the last light drained from the sky, we grew quiet. The four of us would sit around the table or lie on our beds, barely talking. Just waiting. Not for sleep to come, not for morning, just waiting. One of my friends tried asking around town, pressing the locals for answers. Folk shut him down fast. Some turned away without a word, some muttered things under their breath, crossing themselves or whispering prayers. A few just gave him a look like he was already cursed for even asking. When he came back, pale and shaken, all he said was they won't talk about it. We all felt it. Whatever this was, it wasn't a prank. It wasn't some teenagers messing with us. And it wasn't animals. Something had singled us out, and it was only a matter of time before it came back. And that time was our last night there. It started the same way, uneasy silence. Then came the first thud. The trailer rocked. Not a gentle knock, not scratching this time, but a full-bodied slam like something huge had thrown its weight against the wall. Dishes rattled in the cabinets. Another slam came from the opposite wall, inhumanly fast for that thing to move around and do that. The siding groaned under the force, and the whole trailer rocked on its axles. Then another hit from the back, harder this time, making the frame shudder. This thing was circling, ramming, trying to break us down. The scratching came next, long claws raking against the windows, moving slow like it was savoring it. The sound cut straight through me. Then the laughter started. It wasn't loud, not at first, just a low, rasping chuckle drifting through the walls. It circled the trailer the way the knocks had. Outside one wall, then the next, then the roof. Sometimes it rose, sometimes it dropped to a deep growl that came from something inhuman. I made the mistake of glancing out the window nearest me. The curtain was thin, and the lamp behind me cast just enough glow to show what stood outside. That thing. I saw that stretched human form again, the hunched shoulders, the limbs that were so grotesquely long. joints bent the wrong way. I got a glimpse of its skin this time. It was pale, almost gray, and it looked like it was clinging tight to its bones. I couldn't move. I only breathed when one of the guys screamed, "Shoot it!" The friend closest to the door grabbed the rifle, yanked the handle, and fired into the night. The blast deafened me in that trailer. The flash was blinding for half a heartbeat. For one frozen instant, I saw it lit up clear as day in the floodlights. Every wrong angle of its body, the grin splitting wide, claws stretched towards the door. Everyone saw it. And then came the scream. Not from us, but from that thing. Don't get me wrong, we were in hysterics too, but nothing that we were making inside that trailer compared to the scream that that thing made outside. It wasn't like a person. It wasn't even like an animal. It was high-pitched. It made my ears ring. My vision swam, and every hair on my body stood on end. And then, just like that, it was gone. None of us moved. None of us dared look outside. We slammed the door shut, locked it, dragged the table across the door again, and even the bunks against it this time. After that, silence reigned. We sat together in the center of the room, rifles clutched, eyes bloodshot, ears straining for the smallest sound as the night dragged on. Each minute felt like it stretched into an hour. But when dawn finally broke, we were still sitting there, alive and unharmed. But none of us had slept a wink. Hell, none of us even really moved. And even though nothing else happened that night, I think all of us knew the same thing. If we didn't leave, it wouldn't stop. Within the next day, we packed up what little we had and left town without a word to our boss. We just drove off. No goodbyes, no excuses, no real plan. We just knew we couldn't stay there any longer. We never explained it to our families. We never contacted the boss. Among ourselves, we even stopped bringing it up within a month. I think it was easier for everyone to just bury it. I won't say the name of what it is, but folks who know the stories don't like to say it out loud either. And after what I lived through, I'm not about to test that. But what I'll tell you is what I believe. I think these things watch. I think they wait for the cocky ones, the loud ones, the ones that don't listen to the warnings. I think when one of these things gets wind of that, it listens when you laugh about things you don't understand. And when it decides to come closer, there isn't much you can do but endure it and hope that it moves on. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't kids. It wasn't some animal scratching at the door. And it damn sure wasn't a joke. Something was out there with us. I've worked plenty of jobs I've hated, but none of them got under my skin the way that this one did. It was night security at a half-finished construction site at the edge of town in nowhere important New Mexico. It sounded simple enough when I signed on. Just show up at dusk, walk the grounds, keep an eye on the cameras, make sure nobody stripped copper wiring or tagged the concrete skeleton with spray paint. Easy money, right? The site itself was massive, a future office complex, or so they told me, though in its current state it looked more like the bones of something that had died mid-birth. Steel beams jutted into the sky like ribs, concrete slabs stacked on one another but going nowhere, echoing when you walked across them. At night, the floodlights bolted to temporary poles cast harsh cones of light that never seemed to reach the shadows between the beams. The result was a place that always looked half-lit. The office, and I use my quotations, was a line of battered portable trailers parked near the entrance gate. Inside one of them sat a desk, a bank of grainy monitors linked with security cameras, a coffee pot that never stopped tasting burnt no matter how often you scrubbed it, and a single chair that groaned like it was in pain whenever you sat down. My shift started the same way every night. Clock in, walk the perimeter once, flashlight sweeping over stacks of rebar and pallets of drywall, checking for footprints or signs of tampering, then back to the trailer to watch the screens, fighting to stay awake as the hours dragged by. Every 2 hours, another patrol. The company was strict about logs. If the bosses didn't see regular entries in the notebooks, they docked your pay, and I needed all the pay that I could get. But here's the thing. The site wasn't like other jobs. It was cut off, isolated. On one side stretched desert that looked endless under the moonlight, the kind of land where the sound dies and shadows seem to move on their own. On the other side was what you could call a really pathetic forest. More like just a line of trees, really, but thick enough sometimes to where you could have your eyes play tricks on you if you stared into it long enough. There were no neighbors, No passing traffic. Once the construction crew packed up and the last truck rolled away, it was just me. I told myself I didn't mind the quiet, but truth be told, it didn't feel like quiet. It felt like being listened to. The first night was nothing special, at least not at the start. I clocked in, poured myself a cup of coffee, and settled in at the monitors. Grainy feed, boring work. I scribbled the date and time in the logbook, doodled in the margins out of boredom, and told myself it'd be a long, dull shift. For the first couple of hours, that's exactly what it was. I flipped between screens, stretched my legs out with a quick walk around the trailers, and listened to the wind kick dust across the lot. The place echoed even when it was still, the kind of silence that seemed to hum in your ears. It wasn't until after midnight that I noticed the first odd thing. The radio, clipped to my vest, hissed and crackled for no reason. It was just a sharp burst of static and then nothing. I tapped it, adjusting the dial, but there was no chatter to explain it. This was a solo post. The company didn't even use comms at night, just the radio in case of emergencies. I tried to shake it off. Electronics glitch all the time out here. The dust chewed through everything eventually. But not long after that, I stepped out to stretch my legs and heard footsteps in the gravel. Crunch, 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 like someone walking slowly along the fence line. My flashlight beam swept over the empty ground, and I called out, "Company security," and waited for some guilty party to shuffle. But there wasn't a trespasser to be found. There was nothing. Later, during a patrol through the main framework, I found something that stopped me cold. Boot prints in the layer of dust covering the concrete floor. Fresh and clear. At first, I figured they belonged to someone on the crew, but the site had been locked down at dusk. I checked every door, every gate, and the tracks didn't make sense because they cut across a slab in a straight line and then just stopped. No turnaround, no scuff marks, just an abrupt end halfway across the empty floor, like whoever had left them had walked until they vanished into thin air. I crouched there with my flashlight for longer than I cared to admit, waiting for the trick of my eyes to show itself, but it never did. On my way back to the trailer, I heard hammering, sharp, ringing strikes of metal on metal echoing through the frame. I thought that maybe one of the crew had stayed behind to finish something, but I knew that that was impossible. I'd watched them all drive off hours ago, and every last tool was supposed to be locked in the shipping containers by the trailer so they didn't get stolen overnight. The hammering stopped when I called out. I thought to myself, maybe it was a loose cable smacking the wind. Maybe my ears were playing tricks on me. I wrote all clear in the logbook and sat down at the monitors again, but my hands wouldn't stop tapping against the desk. By the time the crew rolled in the next morning, I felt like I'd worked a triple shift instead of a single night. They joked that it looked like I'd seen a ghost. I told them it was just the coffee keeping me up. But the truth was, I left that morning with the first seeds of dread gnawing in my gut. I told myself the first night had just been nerves. A new job, trying to perform without getting in trouble. A new place that I had to explore. And of course, being alone there was kind of eerie. Empty buildings make noise, dust plays tricks, radios glitch. But by the time I showed up for the second shift, I had almost convinced myself of that. Almost. The second evening started routine. Perimeter check, log entry, stale coffee. I tried to focus on the practical. I even whistled while I walked patrol, pretending that I wasn't spooked. And for a while, my brain believed that. The night dragged quiet, dull as usual. I was halfway through my shift when the radio clipped to my vest crackled again. At first, it was just static, the usual hiss. Then, clear as day, I heard a voice. My supervisor's voice. "Hey, Hector, you there?" I froze. That man had gone home hours ago. I'd watched his truck roll out at dusk. Nobody else should be here on this frequency. I pressed the button anyway. Copy. Who is this? No answer. Just more static. I shook my head, set the radio down, told myself it was a bleed-through from another channel. It happens sometimes. But then again, why did it use my name if it wasn't meant for me? 10 minutes later, another voice crackled through. This time, it was one of my friends from the day shift, a guy named Louise. "Third floor," he said, chuckling. "Waiting for you." The hair in my arm stood up. Louise had punched out before sundown. I'd seen him leave too. I swallowed hard and tried to steady my breathing. Maybe one of them left their radio on. Maybe someone was screwing with me. That had to be it. Raz the new guy, right? Maybe they were trying to phase me in or something. Still, I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward the main building. But then I saw something that I still can't explain. On the third floor, pacing back and forth, was a figure. This thing was incredibly tall, but its legs were bent just a little wrong, and its arms were swinging in jerky arcs like a puppet on a loose string. I raised my flashlight and called up, "Hey! Who's there?" The figure froze mid-step. For one long moment, it just stood there staring down at me, though I couldn't see this thing's face, only the silhouette. Then without a sound, it turned and slipped into the shadows. Just gone. But that made my stomach drop. The floodlight still bathed the floor with this harsh white glow. There was nowhere for anything up there to go. No cover to duck behind, yet it had vanished like it never existed at all. I ran back to the trailer after that. When I reached the office, I laughed, trying to shake the panic that was buzzing through me. I reached for the radio to log the incident, and that's when it spoke again. Not my supervisor this time. Not Louise. Me. Myself. My own voice. It came through clear and calm. "I see you." I dropped the radio like it had burned me. It hit the floor with a crack, still hissing faintly with static. The rest of the night crawled by. I stayed locked in that trailer, eyes glued to the cameras. Every flicker of movement on the screens made my heart jump, but nothing else happened. Just silence. How could anybody prank me with a walkie-talkie? With my own voice? When dawn finally broke, I clocked out with my hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The crew joked that I looked hungover and I didn't even correct them. I made it through my second night, but deep down I knew something had noticed me and it wasn't finished. By the time the third shift rolled around, my nerves were shot. I showed up with 2 thermoses of coffee and told myself it was just stress, just sleep deprivation. If I could get through the night without jumping at shadows, I'd prove to myself that nothing was wrong. But I even put my old hunting rifle in the cab of my truck just in case. It made me feel just a little bit safer. But from the moment I stepped onto the lot, I knew I was lying to myself. The air felt different, like the atmosphere was crackling, like it was static electricity or something. That static felt like it was pressing against my skin. Normally, you could hear the hum of life even out here. Stray dogs barking in the distance, crickets in the brush. Tonight, there was nothing. Just a suffocating stillness that made the floodlights hum twice as loud in my ears. My first patrol was worse than usual. Even with my rifle clutched to myself, I shined my flashlight along the fence line, across beams into piles of supplies. Everything looked the same, but the silence chewed at me. Back in the trailer, I tried to distract myself with paperwork, but I couldn't ignore the first knock. It came soft, just 3 quick raps against the thin metal wall. I froze, staring at the door. Then a voice followed. "Hey, open up, it's me." It sounded like Louise, but I knew it wasn't him. I stood up, gun in hand, and yanked the door open. Nothing. Just the gravel lot under the floodlights. Then I stepped outside. I saw the dirt disturbed, tracks leading away from the trailer. Bare footprints, but they looked wrong. Like halfway through making them, something changed the way that it looked. I shut the door fast and bolted it. The voices kept coming, though. Sometimes my supervisor, sometimes Louise, sometimes people I didn't even recognize, all calling my name, all trying to get me to come out. Once the knock came again, harder, shaking the thin frame of the trailer, I knew that I couldn't go out there. If I did, that thing would get me. I checked the monitors that night compulsively, flipping through each feed. My stomach dropped when I saw the figure walking the perimeter. But it wasn't just any figure. It looked just like me. Same jacket, same stride, walking in the dark. The feed showed me circling the fence line, only I was in the trailer staring at the screen, and this wasn't a recording from earlier. I clicked through every angle, desperate for proof that it was a glitch or an old recording, but each time the feed returned to that camera, the figure was still there. Me, pacing slow, head bent down, like I was searching for something in the dirt. How could something look just like me, all the way down to the uniform that I was wearing? By 3 a.m., things escalated again. The floodlights started shutting off. The cameras caught the change, but they lagged, jittery as if something moved too fast for them to register. I shut the monitors off. I couldn't look anymore. I sat in the corner of the trailer with my gun across my lap, whispering prayers I hadn't said since I was a kid. And then the laughter started. Distorted, broken like a tape recorder playing in reverse. For the rest of the night, I stayed there in that corner, rocking back and forth like it might help me stay sane. I didn't move until the first pale gray of dawn began seeping through the blinds. Then the crew rolled in. I stumbled past them without a word, ignoring their stares. I swore that I wouldn't go back. After that last night, after the voices and the thing wearing my face on camera, I told myself that no paycheck was worth it. But bills don't just vanish because you're scared. By the end of the week, my bank account forced me through those gates again. The first hour crawled by in silence, but it was way too much silence. I tried to focus on my logbook, tried to believe it would be a dull night. That lie lasted until the radio crackled. The first voice was once again my supervisor. "Check the third floor, Hector." Then Louise, cheerful and chuckling. "We're waiting for you." I gritted my teeth, refusing to touch the radio, but the voices didn't stop. If anything, they multiplied. My brother's voice, my mother's voice, and then my abuela. Her voice came soft and warm like it was when I was a kid. "Come, mijo, don't be afraid." My chest locked up. My abuela had been dead for 6 years. The trailer walls seemed to shrink around me after I heard her voice. I grabbed my gun and my flashlight and forced myself out the door. This had to stop. The sight was black beyond the reach of the floodlights. I turned my beam towards the steel frame, and that's when I heard the metal groaning. Something was climbing the skeleton of the building. At first, I thought it was a man scaling the beams, but the longer I watched, the worse it became. It crawled across the beams, straight up, on all fours, elbows and knees bent too far, moving with a fluid, animal-like grace. Then it stopped and stood up straight when it hit another floor, unnaturally tall and silhouetted against the light. I raised my gun, and something came over the fear. Anger. I yelled at it to show itself. The figure didn't answer. It dropped from the third floor in one motion, landing on the gravel without a sound. It was still a good distance away, but close enough that the details hit me like a gut punch. And they're details that I will never forget as long as I live. This thing was insanely tall. Shoulders hunched, limbs long, body twisted like it'd been stretched wrong. A coyote's muzzle, narrow and sharp, but its mouth curled into a grin that was too wide and too human. And in that grin were teeth. But not animal teeth. Teeth like mine. Human teeth set in an animal's jaw. It tilted its head at me, the way a dog listens, and then it spoke. "Hector." But the voice wasn't its own. It was mine. Perfect. My own voice whispering back at me from that coyote grin. My fingers squeezed the trigger before I could think. Laughter echoed through the beams. High, low, broken, layered. It was like it came from every direction at once. I spun, flashlight from shadow to shadow, but the sight was empty. And then one by one the floodlights flickered back on, and nothing else was there. That laughter faded into silence, and I knew with bone-deep certainty that whatever it was, it had chosen not to finish me off. Not yet, anyway. I didn't go back for another shift after that. The morning after that final night, I walked straight into the office trailer, slapped my badge on the desk, and told my boss I was done. No explanation, no excuse, just finished. He leaned back in his chair smirking like he'd been expecting it. "You lasted longer than the last guy," he said. "Guess the nights out here aren't for everyone." I wanted to ask him what he meant. If others had seen that thing too, why they said they quit, but my throat locked up and I just turned and left. I realized at that moment I didn't care. If other people had seen it, then it sucks to be them. I saw it and I got out, and I will never go back. That was years ago. I've worked plenty of jobs since then. Warehouses, delivery, retail, but nothing that put me on a construction site, especially not at night. Radio static is enough to send me sweating. I keep one in my truck for emergencies, but I've never turned it on. People laugh when I tell them why I left that job. They just think I burned out or that the desert air cooked my brain or something. Whatever, it's easier than trying to explain what I saw. I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know that it's still out there.